Before we dive into today's incredible story, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button right now, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Seriously, I want to know if you're tuning in from Texas, Tokyo, Toronto, or somewhere completely different. The year is 1939. War has erupted across Europe. Nazi Germany's Luftwaffe is demonstrating a terrifying new reality. Airplanes have become weapons of mass destruction. Poland falls in weeks. Then Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium. France crumbles in 6 weeks. And soon, the Battle of Britain begins, a months-long aerial siege that will rain thousands of tons of explosives on British cities, killing over 40,000 civilians and destroying more than 1 million homes. The problem facing Allied military planners is stark and brutal. Aircraft have become the dominant weapon of modern warfare, but there's almost no way to stop them. Traditional artillery was designed to hit targets on the ground or at sea, relatively slow-moving objects that could be tracked and predicted. But aircraft, they move at 200, 300, even 400 miles per hour. They climb, dive, and turn on a dime. They attack from angles that make targeting nearly impossible. The anti-aircraft guns of 1939 are equipped with 2 types of fuses: impact fuses and timed fuses. Impact fuses detonate when they physically hit something, perfect for armored tanks, useless against aircraft because you have to score a direct hit on a small, fast-moving target thousands of feet in the air. The odds are astronomical. During the early weeks of the Blitz, British anti-aircraft batteries fire tens of thousands of shells into the night sky. The ratio of shells fired to aircraft actually downed? Somewhere between 2,500 to 1 and, by some estimates, as high as 20,000 to 1. Gunners aren't defending cities. They're putting on expensive fireworks displays while bombers fly overhead with near impunity. Timed fuses are supposed to be better. These are mechanical marvels, tiny clockwork mechanisms that start ticking the moment the shell leaves the barrel. Artillerymen calculate the aircraft's speed, altitude, and trajectory, set the fuse for a specific number of seconds, and pray the shell explodes near the target. But near is relative. If the calculations are off by even half a second, and they usually are, the shell detonates too early, with shrapnel dispersing harmlessly into thin air, or too late, burying itself uselessly in the ground. One British anti-aircraft gunner describes the experience bluntly. Trying to hit an aircraft at night is like trying to shoot a fly in a darkened room with a rifle while blindfolded. By 1940, the situation has become desperate. The Royal Navy is losing ships to dive bombers and torpedo planes at an alarming rate. HMS Glorious, HMS Courageous, HMS Ark Royal, aircraft carriers and capital ships are being sent to the bottom by aircraft that anti-aircraft guns simply cannot stop. British cities are being pounded nightly during the Blitz. American military planners, watching from across the Atlantic with growing alarm, know they will soon face the same nightmare. When Japan attacks Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, the inadequacy of anti-aircraft defenses becomes tragically, brutally clear. The attack itself is devastating. 4 battleships sunk, for damaged, 188 aircraft destroyed, 2,403 Americans killed. But there's an additional horror that receives less attention. 48 civilians in Honolulu are killed that day, and most of them die not from Japanese bombs but from American anti-aircraft shells that fail to explode in the air and instead crash into the city below, detonating on impact with homes, streets, and people. Something has to change. The question is, what? How do you make a shell smart enough to know when it's near a target? How do you fit radio equipment that fills entire rooms, into a 5-inch artillery shell? How do you make that equipment tough enough to survive being fired from a cannon at forces that would instantly kill a human being? And how do you do all of this before the enemy does? These seem like questions without answers. The technology doesn't exist. The physics seem impossible. The engineering challenges appear insurmountable. They are wrong. And the man who will prove them wrong is a 39-year-old physicist named Merle Antony Tuve. To understand just how impossible Merle Tuve's challenge is, you need to understand the technology of 1940. This is a world before transistors, before integrated circuits, before anything remotely resembling modern electronics. The most sophisticated electronic devices are vacuum tubes, glass cylinders the size of your thumb containing metal filaments suspended in a near vacuum. These tubes are fragile. They require electrical power to operate. They generate heat. They're bulky. Now, picture trying to cram a working radio transmitter, a radio receiver, amplification circuits, a battery, and a detonator into a space roughly the size of a soup can, about 5 inches tall and 3 inches in diameter. That alone sounds nearly impossible. But it gets worse. Much worse. When an anti-aircraft gun fires, the shell accelerates from 0 to 2,800 feet per second in a fraction of a second. The forces involved are almost incomprehensible. This creates an acceleration of 20,000 Gs. That's 20,000 times the force of Earth's gravity pressing on every component inside that shell. To put that in perspective, fighter pilots black out at around 9 Gs. Modern spacecraft experience maybe 3 to 4 Gs during launch. The proximity fuse needs to survive forces that would instantly liquefy a human being, shatter glass like a sledgehammer hitting a wine glass, and snap metal like a toothpick. But surviving launch is just the beginning. After the shell leaves the barrel, it needs to actually work. It needs to send out radio waves while spinning at thousands of rotations per minute. It needs to measure when those waves bounce back from a target. It needs to calculate distance in fractions of a second. It needs to make a split-second decision about when to detonate. And it needs to trigger an explosive charge, all while traveling through the air at nearly a mile every 2 seconds, buffeted by wind and atmospheric pressure changes. And it needs to do this reliably. Every single time. Thousands of times. Because this isn't a laboratory experiment. This is war. Lives depend on it. Dr. James Van Allen, who works on the project and will later discover Earth's radiation belts, puts it bluntly, almost no one ever hit an airplane with the old-fashioned fuses. It would be just a sheer stroke of luck to hit anything. The losses are mounting daily, and the statistics are horrifying. In the Pacific, Japanese dive bombers, particularly the Aichi D-3A Val and the Nakajima B-5N Kate, are devastatingly accurate. At the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942, the aircraft carrier USS Lexington is sunk by aerial torpedoes and bombs. The USS Yorktown is badly damaged. She'll be patched up just in time to fight at Midway, where she's sunk by Japanese aircraft. Ships are dying because they cannot defend themselves from air attack. One senior Navy officer involved in the proximity fuse project states flatly that every month's delay in developing the weapon is equivalent to losing a cruiser. That isn't hyperbole. That's cold mathematics based on actual ship losses. Cruisers like the USS Chicago, sunk by torpedo bombers off Rennell Island in January 1943. The USS Juneau, sunk with the loss of nearly 700 men including all 5 Sullivan brothers. Ships are being sent to the bottom because anti-aircraft guns might as well be firing blanks. And it isn't just the Pacific. In Europe, the German Luftwaffe continues its assault on Britain. Even after the main blitz ends in May 1941, the threat of aerial bombardment remains constant. British anti-aircraft defenses improve slightly with better tactics and radar-directed fire, but the fundamental problem remains. You still need to guess when and where to detonate your shells. And guessing wrong means the bomber gets through. By 1944, Germany will unleash a new nightmare, the V-1 flying bomb, an early cruise missile powered by a pulse jet engine. These pilotless aircraft, launched by the thousands, scream across the English Channel toward London at 400 miles per hour. Londoners call them buzz bombs or doodlebugs because of the distinctive sound of their engines. When the engine cuts out, you have about 15 seconds before impact. How do you shoot down a robot traveling faster than most fighters? With traditional anti-aircraft fire? Impossible. British scientists are working frantically on the problem too. They explore photoelectric fuses, devices that use light sensors to detect aircraft by changes in brightness as a plane passes overhead. The idea is clever, but photoelectric triggers have serious problems. They're triggered by sunlight reflecting off clouds. They go off when another shell explodes nearby. They're useless at night. Prime Minister Winston Churchill himself is pushing hard for photoelectric fuses, calling them vitally important to Britain's survival. But the technology just isn't reliable enough. The Germans know about proximity fuses too. In fact, German scientists develop over 30, perhaps as many as 50, different proximity fuse designs for anti-aircraft use during the war. They try acoustic fuses triggered by engine noise. They try fuses based on electrostatic fields. They try radio fuses similar to what the Americans are attempting. But none see combat service.
Why?
Because German scientists reach the same conclusion everyone else has. The technology cannot survive the forces of being fired from a gun. The electronics will shatter. The batteries will fail. The whole concept is impossible. The Japanese don't develop a workable proximity fuse until the very end of the war, far too late to matter. After the war ends, both German and Japanese military officials admit they had no idea proximity weapons were being used against them. They simply couldn't understand why American anti-aircraft fire had suddenly become uncannily accurate, capable of destroying aircraft without actually hitting them directly. Into this impossible situation steps Merle Tuve. And he has an idea that everyone says cannot work. Merle Antony Tuve is not a typical military contractor. Born in Canton, South Dakota, in 1901, he's the son of a college president. His childhood friend is Ernest Lawrence, who will later win the Nobel Prize in Physics for inventing the cyclotron. Tuve himself becomes a brilliant experimental physicist, a pioneer in using radio waves to probe the ionosphere, work that provides crucial theoretical foundations for radar. In 1933, he confirms the existence of the neutron and measures atomic binding forces. This is a man who understands both radio technology and nuclear physics at the deepest levels. In August 1940, with war raging across Europe and American entry into the conflict looking increasingly likely, Vannevar Bush, director of the newly created National Defense Research Committee and president of the Carnegie Institution, appoints Tuve to lead Section T at the Department of Terrestrial Magnetism in Washington, D.C. The mission: develop a proximity fuse that can work in artillery shells. The timeline: as fast as humanly possible. The stakes: the survival of the Allied naval forces and potentially the outcome of the war itself. Tuve's first move is to assemble a team. Not just any team. He needs the best minds in electronics, physics, and engineering he can find. Within months, his initial group of 4 has grown to nearly 200. Physicists from universities, engineers from industry, ham radio hobbyists who understand radio circuits, statisticians to analyze test results. By the end of the war, over 1,000 scientists, engineers, and support staff will work under Tuve's direction. But in 1940, he's starting with almost nothing except a mission that everyone agrees is impossible. The team has several options to consider. They could try photoelectric fuses using light sensors. They could try acoustic fuses triggered by the sound of aircraft engines. They could try magnetic sensors that detect the metal of an aircraft. Or they could try the radio approach, essentially putting a miniature radar set inside every shell. Tuve and his team systematically evaluate every option. They run tests. They build prototypes. They fail. A lot. But Tuve has a philosophy that becomes legendary among his staff, and he posts it on the laboratory walls for everyone to see. I don't want any damn fool in this laboratory to save money. I only want him to save time. Shoot at an 80% job. We can't afford perfection. Don't try for an A. In a war, D is necessary and enough, but an F is fatal. These aren't the words of a man interested in academic excellence or careful, methodical research. These are the words of a man who understands that people are dying every single day his team fails to produce results. Tuve drives his staff relentlessly. Some call him short-tempered, demanding, even tyrannical. He has zero patience for excuses or alibis from his team or from the industrial partners manufacturing fuse components. When work stalls, he ruthlessly reshuffles personnel. Workers arrive at the laboratory to find notes posted on the Section T bulletin board. This is it. M.A. Tuve. They call them Tuve's monthlies, sudden reassignments based on bottlenecks, setbacks, or promising new leads. The team settles on the radio approach. It's the most technically promising, but it requires solving multiple, impossible problems simultaneously. Problem 1. Miniaturization. They need to shrink vacuum tubes, those fragile glass cylinders that fill entire radio cabinets, down to a size that can fit inside a shell along with all the other components. Sylvania Electric Products takes on the challenge, developing what becomes known as the T1 tube, a vacuum tube no bigger than a pencil eraser, capable of functioning under extreme conditions. It's a manufacturing miracle. Problem 2. Shock resistance. This is the big one. How do you make glass vacuum tubes survive 20,000 Gs of acceleration? Ray Mindlin, a materials science specialist from Columbia University, redesigns the tubes from the ground up. The filaments are made shorter and thicker so they won't snap. The internal structure is reinforced with special mounting techniques. The tubes are potted, embedded in shock-absorbing compounds that cushion them during launch. Test after test is conducted, firing prototype tubes from guns, recovering them, examining the failures under microscopes. Most shatter. But slowly, painfully, the team develops tubes that can survive forces that would kill a human being instantly. Problem 3. Power. The fuse needs electricity to operate the radio transmitter and receiver, but batteries of the 1940s are heavy, unreliable, and vulnerable to shock. The National Carbon Company, which will later become Union Carbide and eventually Energizer, develops a specialized battery that's nothing short of ingenious. It uses centrifugal force from the spinning shell itself to spread the electrolyte and activate the battery the moment it's fired. The shell's rotation becomes its power source. Brilliant. Elegant. And it works. Problem 4. Circuit design. This comes partially from the British. In September 1940, the Tizard mission, a British technical delegation led by Sir Henry Tizard, arrives in the United States carrying some of Britain's most closely guarded secrets, including circuit designs for a radio oscillator that could theoretically work in a proximity fuse. Lloyd Berkner, one of Tuve's key team members, improves the British design by creating separate transmitter and receiver circuits, making the system more reliable and more sensitive to reflections from aircraft. The proximity fuse works like this. The shell contains a miniature radio transmitter that uses the shell body itself as an antenna. As soon as the shell leaves the gun barrel and the battery activates, it begins transmitting a continuous radio wave at roughly 180 to 220 MHz, similar to modern FM radio frequencies. When those radio waves reflect off a target, an aircraft, with sufficient strength, the reflection is picked up by the receiver circuit and amplified by the vacuum tubes. This triggers a thyrotron tube that acts as an electronic switch, releasing energy stored in a tiny capacitor. That energy flows to an electrical detonator, which triggers the main explosive charge of the shell. All of this happens in milliseconds, detonating the shell within about 70 feet of the target. It's essentially a tiny radar set that can survive being shot out of a cannon. A device the size of a soup can that contains more advanced electronics than most entire laboratories of the era. By June 1941, Section T successfully test fires a 5-inch shell with a working transmitting fuse from a testing ground. By mid-1942, they're ready for the ultimate test, combat conditions at sea. But the project has outgrown the Department of Terrestrial Magnetism. Tuve needs more space, more equipment, more people. He approaches the trustees of Johns Hopkins University with a bold proposal: sponsor a new laboratory dedicated entirely to developing and producing the proximity fuse. The trustees agree, even though Tuve can't tell them what the laboratory will actually be doing. Security is that tight. The first home of what becomes the Applied Physics Laboratory is a vacant used car showroom in Silver Spring, Maryland. On August 12, 1942, the moment of truth arrives. The newly commissioned light cruiser USS Cleveland, on its shakedown cruise in the Chesapeake Bay, begins a scheduled 2-day live-fire evaluation of the proximity fuse. The targets are 3 radio-controlled drones, unmanned aircraft that can perform evasive maneuvers. The Navy officers in charge of the test are skeptical. Some are openly doubtful. Many have seen promising weapons fail spectacularly before. The first drone is released and begins its programmed flight path. The Cleveland's 5-inch guns open fire with proximity-fused shells. Within seconds, not minutes, seconds, the drone is obliterated. Not damaged. Not forced to land. Obliterated. Blown into pieces so small they scatter across the water like confetti. The Navy officers watching through binoculars are stunned into silence. A second drone is released. Same result, complete destruction within seconds. The test controllers can't believe what they're seeing. They've conducted hundreds of anti-aircraft tests with conventional ammunition. Drones usually survive multiple direct passes, taking hits and continuing to fly. These drones are being completely annihilated with just a few shells. The Cleveland's gunners have brought down both targets with just 4 bursts of fire. 4 bursts. Conventional ammunition would have required hundreds or thousands of shells for the same result, if it could achieve the result at all. The Navy cancels the remainder of the 2-day test on the spot. There's no need to continue. The proximity fuse works. It works spectacularly. It works beyond anyone's wildest expectations. The Navy immediately orders mass production from 5 separate manufacturers: Crosley Corporation, RCA, Eastman Kodak, General Electric, and McQuay Norris. Production starts slowly, just 500 units per day by the end of 1942. But by late 1943, production has ramped up to an astonishing 40,000 units daily. By war's end, 70,000 units per day rolling off assembly lines. The proximity fuse is ready for war. The question now is, can it survive actual combat? That answer will come 5 months later, in the waters off Guadalcanal, on a morning that will change naval warfare forever. January 5, 1943. Dawn breaks over the Solomon Islands. The light cruiser USS Helena is part of a naval task force operating near Guadalcanal, covering American ground positions and watching for Japanese air attacks. The Helena is a Brooklyn-class cruiser, 537 feet long, displacing 10,000 tons, armed with 15 6-inch guns and 8 5-inch dual-purpose guns. She's been in combat before. She was torpedoed at Pearl Harbor during the initial attack, spent 6 months in repairs, and was sent to the Pacific Theater for revenge. Her crew has seen action at the Battle of Cape Esperance and the brutal naval battle of Guadalcanal. These are experienced, battle-hardened sailors who've learned not to trust miracle weapons. But today is different. Loaded in the Helena's magazines are 500 rounds of a new type of ammunition, 5-inch shells equipped with proximity fuses. Some of the gunners are openly skeptical. They've heard rumors about the new funny fuse, as sailors are starting to call it, but seeing is believing. Anti-aircraft fire has always been a desperate exercise. You fire thousands of rounds into the sky and pray something connects. The idea that a shell could somehow detonate itself near a target sounds like something out of Buck Rogers. At dawn, 4 Japanese Aichi D-3A dive bombers, codenamed VAL by Allied intelligence, appear on the horizon. These planes are slow by 1943 standards, maxing out at about 240 miles per hour, but they're accurate and surprisingly durable. The formation attacks the task force. One bomber scores a hit on the New Zealand light cruiser HMAS Achilles before the group begins to withdraw. As the Japanese planes turn to leave the area, still within range, the Helena's anti-aircraft batteries open fire almost as an afterthought. It's a cursory barrage, nothing the crew expects to accomplish much beyond letting the Japanese know they're not welcome back. 2 5-inch gun mounts fire. Approximately 50 to 60 shells streak into the pre-dawn sky in about 90 seconds. Not all of them are equipped with proximity fuses. The Navy is still being cautious with the new technology, mixing conventional and VT-fused rounds. But enough of them are. What happens next changes naval warfare forever. Within 90 seconds, 2 Japanese dive bombers explode in mid-air and plunge into the ocean in flames. Not hit directly by shells, that would be nearly impossible at that range and speed. Destroyed by shells that detonated near them, close enough for the blast wave and shrapnel to shred the aircraft's control surfaces, rupture fuel tanks, and kill the crew. The Helena's chief gunnery officer, watching through binoculars as the sun rises, is absolutely stunned. In his official report filed later that day, he gives full credit to the proximity fuse for both kills. Commander William Deke Parsons, the officer who personally shepherded the first 5,000 proximity-fused shells to the Pacific and who will later arm the first atomic bomb aboard the Enola Gay, notes the engagement in his records. First combat use of the VT proximity fuse. First confirmed kills. 4 Japanese dive bombers attacked the task force. 2 shot down without being directly hit. The kill ratio just went from 2,500 shells per aircraft to approximately 25 shells per aircraft. A 100-fold improvement. Overnight. News spreads through the Pacific Fleet like wildfire. By early 1943, proximity-fused ammunition is being distributed to more ships across the theater. The historian Samuel Eliot Morison, in his definitive 15-volume history of United States naval operations in World War II, describes subsequent engagements in the Solomon Islands. Japanese planes attacking at night, suddenly erupting in flames, smoking fuselages and bright surface bonfires, marking where aircraft fell from the sky, destroyed by anti-aircraft fire that had become uncannily, impossibly accurate. But the Navy is paranoid about secrecy. The proximity fuse is classified at a level comparable to the Manhattan Project and the D-Day invasion plans. The fear is simple. If a fuse-equipped shell falls on land and fails to detonate, the enemy might recover it, reverse engineer it, and develop their own version. The technological advantage would evaporate overnight. So for the first year and a half of combat use, proximity-fused shells are used exclusively over open water. If a dud falls in the ocean, it sinks to the bottom and the secret remains safe. Any ship commander who uses VT fuses over land faces court-martial. The breakthrough in Europe comes in June 1944, not over land, but over the English Channel. Germany has unleashed its first vengeance weapon, the V-1 flying bomb, an early cruise missile powered by a pulse jet engine. The V-1 is a terror weapon in the truest sense. It's a small aircraft packed with 1,870 pounds of high explosives, launched from sites in Nazi-occupied France toward London. It travels at 400 miles per hour at low altitude, faster than most Allied fighters. Between June 13 and August 31, 1944, Germany launches over 9,300 V-1s at London, an average of 120 per day. These pilotless aircraft, which Londoners call buzz bombs or doodlebugs because of their distinctive sound, kill over 6,000 people and injure 18,000 more. British anti-aircraft defenses are initially overwhelmed. Traditional timed fuses are nearly useless against targets traveling that fast and that low. Fighters can intercept some, but the V-1s often come in waves that saturate defenses. The situation is desperate. Then the proximity fuse is deployed along the southern coast of England. The results are immediate and dramatic. By the end of the fourth week of using VT fuses, anti-aircraft guns are destroying 79% of all incoming V-1 rockets. Some gun crews report needing just 40 shells per V-1, compared to thousands with conventional fuses. General Frederick Pyle, commander of British Anti-Aircraft Command, later testifies before Parliament. It was the proximity fuse which made possible the 100% successes that Anti-Aircraft Command was obtaining regularly. American scientists gave us the final answer to the flying bomb. By September 1944, the V-1 threat is effectively ended, not by destroying launch sites, not by fighter interception, but by anti-aircraft guns equipped with soup-can-sized radio devices that had been declared impossible just 4 years earlier. Then comes the Battle of the Bulge. December 16, 1944. Germany launches its last major offensive of the war, a massive surprise attack through the Ardennes forest, attempting to split Allied forces and capture the vital Belgian port of Antwerp. For 3 days, despite the desperate situation, the use of proximity-fused shells on European soil remains strictly forbidden. The risk of the technology falling into German hands is considered too great. But the situation becomes critical. On December 19, 1944, officers of the 406th Artillery Group make a command decision. They break the embargo and use proximity-fused shells in combat on European soil for the first time. The effect is devastating. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, formally requests clearance to use VT fuses everywhere in the European theater. 2 days later, on December 21st, all restrictions are removed. German troops advancing through the snow-covered Ardennes suddenly face artillery fire unlike anything they've encountered in 5 years of war. Proximity-fused shells detonate 30 to 50 feet above the ground, raining shrapnel down on men and machines below. There's no foxhole deep enough. There's no cover. There's no defense. One German prisoner, interrogated after capture, describes the attacks as quick, powerful bursts for which there is simply no defense. An American chief ordnance officer reports on one German patrol in the Hurtgen forest caught by a massed artillery barrage using VT fuses. All 96 bodies looked as if they'd gone through a meat grinder. General George S. Patton, never one to mince words, writes directly to the War Department, "The new shell with the funny fuse is devastating. We caught a German battalion trying to cross the Sauer River with a battalion concentration and killed by actual count 702. I think that when all armies get this shell, we will have to devise some new method of warfare. I am glad that you all thought of it first. In the Pacific, the technology proves equally vital as the war enters its final, bloodiest phase. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, proximity fuses help American ships decimate Japanese air attacks. When kamikaze attacks intensify during the Battle of Okinawa in 1945, proximity fuses become the primary defense against suicide aircraft. Which brings us to May 5, 1945. The battle that proves, once and for all, that the soup can trick works. The USS Hadley and USS Evans are radar picket destroyers stationed north of Okinawa, early warning ships meant to detect incoming Japanese air attacks and vector fighters to intercept them. It's one of the most dangerous assignments in the Navy. Radar picket ships are magnets for kamikaze attacks. On the evening of May 5, over 150 Japanese aircraft, mostly kamikazes, launch coordinated attacks against the American fleet. The Hadley and Evans are directly in their path. What follows is 40 minutes of the most intense anti-aircraft combat of the entire war. The two destroyers are surrounded. Japanese aircraft are diving from every direction, high-altitude bombers, low-level torpedo planes, and kamikazes coming straight in at wave-top height. The ship's guns, loaded with proximity-fused ammunition, open fire. The night sky turns into a strobing hellscape of muzzle flashes, tracer rounds, and exploding aircraft. The Hadley's 5-inch guns fire so rapidly and for so long that 3 of them overheat and jam. Gunners work frantically to clear jams and reload while Japanese planes scream toward them at 300 miles per hour. When the smoke clears 40 minutes later, the Hadley and Evans have shot down 47 Japanese aircraft. 47. The official action report states, the horizon from east to northwest was filled with burning planes. Of those 47 aircraft, only 6 managed to hit the ships, and those 6 are aircraft already so badly damaged by proximity-fused shells that they're essentially flying debris when they impact. Both ships survive. Badly damaged, yes, the Hadley has to be towed back to port, but they survive. Without proximity fuses, both ships would have been sunk within the first 10 minutes. 47 aircraft. Shot down in 40 minutes. By 2 destroyers. Using the soup can trick that everyone said was impossible. Japanese officers later admit that the uncanny accuracy of American anti-aircraft fire, the way shells seemed to know when they were near aircraft, was one of the reasons Japan resorted to kamikaze tactics in the first place. They suspected something like a proximity fuse was being used, but they couldn't figure out how the Americans were doing it. Neither could the Germans. After the war, both Axis powers reveal they had no idea proximity weapons were being used against them until it was far too late to respond. The proximity fuse stands as one of the most remarkable technological achievements of World War II, but its legacy extends far beyond the battlefield. This wasn't just about creating a better weapon, it was about fundamentally reimagining what was possible under conditions of extreme pressure, limited time, and astronomical stakes. The lessons from the proximity fuse project continue to resonate today, offering profound insights into innovation, leadership, and the nature of human ingenuity when faced with seemingly insurmountable challenges. First, the power of rejecting impossible. When Merle Tuve took on the proximity fuse project, virtually every expert told him it couldn't be done. The German scientists, some of the most brilliant minds in physics and engineering, had concluded it was impossible. British scientists were pursuing photoelectric alternatives precisely because they didn't believe the radio approach could work. Even many American military officers were skeptical. But Tuve refused to accept impossible as an answer. He didn't ignore the technical challenges, he acknowledged them fully, but he refused to let those challenges dictate what could or couldn't be attempted. This is a crucial distinction. Tuve wasn't blindly optimistic or naive. He was stubbornly determined to find a way around problems that others had decided were insurmountable. This lesson applies far beyond military technology. In business, science, medicine, and virtually every field of human endeavor, breakthrough innovations come from people who refuse to accept conventional wisdom about what's possible. The smartphone was impossible until it wasn't. Reusable rockets were economically unfeasible until SpaceX made them routine. mRNA vaccines were considered too unstable for practical use until the COVID-19 pandemic forced accelerated development. Second, speed over perfection. Tuve's philosophy: don't try for an A in a war. D is necessary and enough, but an F is fatal, runs counter to everything we're taught about excellence and quality. But it reveals a profound truth about innovation under pressure. Perfect solutions that arrive too late are worse than imperfect solutions that arrive in time. The first proximity fuses weren't perfect. They had a failure rate of about 10 to 15% in early production. Some failed to detonate. Some detonated prematurely. But they were good enough to increase anti-aircraft effectiveness by hundreds of percent. And crucially, they were available when they were needed. This lesson has applications in the modern tech industry, where minimum viable product and rapid iteration have become mantras. But it goes deeper than that. In any situation where time is a critical factor, medical emergencies, natural disasters, economic crises, the ability to deliver workable solutions quickly often matters more than the ability to deliver perfect solutions slowly. Third, the importance of ruthless prioritization. Tuve's other famous directive, "I don't want any damn fool in this laboratory to save money. I only want him to save time," represents a masterclass in resource allocation. In most situations, organizations try to optimize for multiple variables: cost, quality, time, and so on. But Tuve recognized that in this specific situation, one variable mattered above all others: time. Every day of delay meant more ships sunk, more cities bombed, more lives lost. So he made the radical decision to eliminate cost as a consideration entirely. Whatever materials were needed, buy them. Whatever staff were required, hire them. Whatever experiments needed to be run them. This single-minded focus on the critical variable, time, allowed the team to move with unprecedented speed. By the end of the war, the proximity fuse program had cost over $1 billion in 1940s dollars, roughly $15 billion in today's terms. That's more than the Manhattan Project cost before Hiroshima. But it saved thousands of lives, hundreds of ships, and possibly shortened the war in the Pacific by months or even years. The return on investment, measured in human terms, was incalculable. Fourth, cross-disciplinary collaboration. The proximity fuse required expertise from multiple fields: radiophysics, material science, electronics engineering, mechanical engineering, chemistry, for explosives, and production engineering. No single person or single discipline could have solved the problem alone. Tuve's genius wasn't just in physics, it was in assembling and orchestrating a team that could integrate knowledge from radically different fields. This remains one of the most challenging aspects of innovation today. Academic disciplines tend to operate in silos. Industries have their own specialized vocabularies and approaches. But breakthrough innovations increasingly happen at the intersection of disciplines: bioengineering, quantum computing, artificial intelligence combined with traditional fields. The ability to bridge these divides, to translate between technical languages and integrate different ways of thinking, is becoming more valuable, not less. Fifth, the human cost of innovation. It's worth noting that Merle Tuve was, by his own admission, a difficult person to work for during the war years. He was demanding, impatient, and sometimes harsh with his staff. Workers were reassigned without warning. Failures were met with sharp criticism. The pressure was relentless. After the war, Tuve himself expressed regret about how he'd driven his team. He recognized that his wartime intensity, while perhaps necessary given the stakes, had come at a personal cost, to himself and to those around him. Several of his key team members suffered stress-related health problems. Marriages strained. People worked themselves to exhaustion. This is an important reminder that innovation isn't free. There are human costs. The question isn't whether those costs exist, they always do, but whether they're justified by the stakes involved and whether they're distributed fairly. In wartime, with thousands of lives hanging in the balance daily, Tuve's approach may have been justified. In peacetime corporate settings, that's a much harder argument to make. Sixth, the technology that changed everything. The proximity fuse didn't just win battles, it changed the fundamental nature of warfare. Before the VT fuse, aircraft were the dominant offensive weapon. After the VT fuse, aircraft became vulnerable in ways they'd never been before. This forced tactical and strategic changes that rippled through military planning for decades. But the technology also had peacetime applications. The miniaturization techniques developed for the proximity fuse, particularly the tiny vacuum tubes, laid crucial groundwork for the electronics revolution that followed World War II. The manufacturing processes developed to produce 22 million highly complex devices with reasonable reliability helped establish quality control methods that would later be applied across American industry. The applied physics laboratory that Tuve founded to develop the fuse still exists today, conducting cutting-edge research in defense and space technology. In a very real sense, the proximity fuse was a stepping stone toward modern electronics. It proved that complex electronic systems could be miniaturized, mass-produced, and made reliable enough for practical applications. This was a crucial psychological and technical breakthrough that paved the way for transistors, integrated circuits, and everything that followed. The numbers that tell the story. Let's put the impact in perspective with some final statistics. Over 22 million proximity fuses produced during the war, each containing approximately 130 miniaturized components, increased anti-aircraft effectiveness by 300 to 500%, destroyed over 1,000 enemy aircraft in the European theater alone, achieved 79% success rate against V-1 rockets, shot down 97% of V-1s targeting Antwerp. Over 2,000 flying bombs in the Battle of Okinawa engagement on May 5, 1945. 47 aircraft destroyed by 2 ships in 40 minutes. General estimates suggest the fuse may have shortened the Pacific War by up to a year, saved thousands of Allied lives, both military and civilian. But perhaps the most telling statistic is this. After the war, when military historians surveyed German and Japanese officers about Allied technological advantages, the proximity fuse was consistently ranked alongside radar and the atomic bomb as one of the 3 most decisive technologies of the war. And yet, unlike those other 2 technologies, the proximity fuse has largely faded from popular memory. The forgotten hero. Merle Tuve never sought fame for his work. After the war, he returned to Carnegie Institution and continued his research in geophysics and cosmic rays. He received numerous awards and honors from scientific societies, but he remained largely unknown to the general public. He died in 1982 at the age of 80, having spent the latter part of his career advocating for peaceful uses of science and warning about the dangers of nuclear proliferation. In many ways, Tuve represents a generation of scientists who believed deeply in public service, who saw their knowledge not as a path to personal wealth or fame, but as a tool to be used for the common good. When his country needed him, he answered. When the military needed the impossible, he delivered it. And when the war was over, he quietly returned to civilian life and continued his work. The final lesson: simple ideas, executed brilliantly. At its core, the proximity fuse is based on an elegantly simple idea. Make the shell smart enough to know when it's near a target. That's it. That's the entire concept. A child could understand it. But turning that simple idea into reality required thousands of person-years of work, over $1 billion in funding, collaboration across dozens of institutions, breakthroughs in multiple fields of science and engineering, and the establishment of entirely new manufacturing processes. Simple ideas are not easy ideas. Elegance in concept doesn't imply simplicity in execution. This is perhaps the most important lesson of all. When we hear about great innovations, whether it's the proximity fuse, the iPhone, or mRNA vaccines, we often focus on the brilliant initial concept. But the real genius isn't in having the idea. It's in doing the unglamorous work of turning that idea into reality. It's in solving the 1,000 small problems that stand between concept and execution. It's in the testing, the failing, the iterating, and the refining. It's in the persistence to keep going when everyone says it's impossible. So the next time you hear someone say, "That's impossible," remember the story of Merle Tuve and his soup can-sized radio trick. Remember the German scientists who concluded it couldn't be done. Remember the military officers who called it a waste of resources. Remember the skeptical gunners who didn't believe it would work until they saw Japanese dive bombers exploding in mid-air without being directly hit. And remember the night of May 5, 1945, when 2 American destroyers faced over 150 attacking aircraft and emerged victorious, having shot down 47 planes in 40 minutes using technology that wasn't supposed to exist. The proximity fuse didn't just down 47 planes in that single engagement. It downed over 1,000 enemy aircraft throughout the war. It destroyed over 2,000 V-1 rockets. It saved London. It helped win the Battle of the Bulge. It protected Allied ships from kamikaze attacks. And it saved an estimated 10,000 Allied lives, possibly many more. All because one stubborn physicist refused to accept that something was impossible. All because a team of scientists, engineers, and technicians worked themselves to exhaustion to solve problems that had no obvious solutions. All because of a device the size of a soup can, packed with technology that everyone said couldn't survive being fired from a cannon. They were wrong. And the world changed because of it. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments. What impossible challenge do you think we should tackle next? What modern problem needs a Merle Tuve, someone willing to ignore conventional wisdom and find a way forward? Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.